Hi, everybody. I'm Phil Muskin. Thanks for coming to this session on nutrition. This was a session that Madeline asked us to put together on nutrition and health and psychiatry. I'm joined by three fantastic people who I've had the pleasure of knowing for a very long time. I'm going to say something in memoriam of someone who Drew and Uma and I knew. I had the pleasure of actually introducing both Uma and Drew to Chef David Boulay, who passed away last year, uh, who was, for me, one of the first people who talked about things like not eating shelf-stable food and the living pantry, which took me a very long time to figure out, which is making stuff that you then use instead of shelf-stable food. He was, you had to have known Chef. I don't know what else to say. To have eaten with him and heard about food from him. It had been my plan originally to invite him to come with us, and he decided, unfortunately, to pass away. Uh, and so let me talk briefly about what this is going to be about. Each of us is going to address a different part of nutrition and a different part of how people used various things that come across the internet, that you read about in the newspaper. What does that actually mean in terms of reality? And what does it mean when you read things in the paper, in a magazine, et cetera? And I'm going to address something that I'm going to do my disclaimer now. I'm going to talk about epigenetics. I do not pretend to understand one word of what I'm going to show you. So you may not ask me questions about this, but I decided to do that because in hearing Drew talk and hearing Uma talk over the years, I felt myself thinking, how does this actually work? I mean, it's not magic. Stuff happens, and it must be happening on some sort of cellular level. So we'll get to that at the end. So I want to thank you all for coming, and I hope you have a good time. And we will leave time for questions. As you know, what comes after this is the poster session. We originally were going to cook. That unfortunately became way too complex. And so, as a poor substitute, and I'll talk about this in my talk, at the end, for those who wish, I've brought a bag of vegan chocolate that I would hope people would want a taste of. And so, if you want the chocolate, you have to stay to the end. Anyway, thank you. And let's start.
Right. Hi, everybody. I'm Drew Ramsey. I'm a psychiatrist. And I look forward to sharing with you all of my slides in just 20 minutes. So we're going to move quickly, but I'm happy to make all these available to you. My hope is to talk with you really about nutritional psychiatry, the fundamentals of it, and a little bit about the evidence focused mostly on depression and mental health, or depression and food. My disclosures, I don't have any financial disclosures other than I do write books for the public. And so I'm very interested in messaging. I do some work in media, but I don't work for like Big Pharma or Big Farm. I tried to work for Big Kale and I have a new book coming out. So I'm very biasable these days. Is my diversity, equity, inclusion slide, besides being one of the few psychiatrists from Wyoming here with you. I also wanted to include, especially today, I wanted letting you know there's hope. I wanted to include this slide about the Mediterranean diet. We use this phrase a lot, and I think it's profoundly racist. You don't think about a Mediterranean meal in terms of Libya or Algeria, right? You probably aren't thinking about Turkish food necessarily. And where I'm from, rural Indiana, when you think about Italian food, that meant going to Pizza Hut or Fazoli's, right? So how we think about and talk to patients about food, I think is a wonderful and incredible way to access and think about culture and to create alliance with our patients and to signal to them we want to know about them and where they're from and who they are in very deep ways. This is where I'm from. I moved up to Wyoming about 3.5 years ago, part of my, I guess, middle-aged mountain mental health sabbatical. But I grew up in really rural Indiana before Phil Muskin took me under his wing at Columbia many, many years ago. And growing up on a farm, my parents were like hippies who were part of that back to the land movement and moved out to rural America, didn't really know what they were doing too much. And we tried. When I then at 26 went to out to do residency, this fascinating thing was happening. People in New York cared that I was from a farm. This really surprised me. I was very anxious about this, being a country boy going to a fancy city place. And two things really happening. I was very lucky. It felt like where people started to care about where their food came from. This is the Brooklyn Grange farm. I started meeting fun people like Phil, who cared about things like organic food or things like vegetables. And then we had this new movement where people were caring about mental health in the media. We started talking about mental health. And I think these two things came together for me in my career around a concept that didn't really even exist called nutritional psychiatry. And it doesn't quite have a definition yet. I think Uma's working on the first official nutritional psychiatry book, but I use this phrase in a cookbook called Eat Complete that I published about 5 years ago. And the idea behind this was thinking that nutrition and nutritional psychiatry give us an opportunity as psychiatrists to get into the prevention business. I just got tired of seeing people that like the only time that you think I'm useful is when you're finally at rock bottom and you finally make an appointment to come and see me. And it's like I'm great at rock bottom, super fun as you all are too. But I thought it would be fun and helpful for people to have more of a kind of public health prevention aspect of psychiatry. And I think food provides us that opportunity. This is how I define nutritional psychiatry: this use of nutrition to optimize brain health. So all of us are interested in it. Right? It gets away with this idea that like 20% of us have mental illness, so we're the only people that should care about this. And then what we do for a living: treat and prevent mental health conditions. It's just sort of simple data at this point that we should ask. I'm getting mid-career. Phil told me that I have to name something after myself soon. So this is the Ramsey Big Five Nutritional Psychiatry Self-Assessment Scale, the RB5NPS. I'm joking here, but it shows you a little how I think about food, which is besides the salad, how do you eat greens? Right? When you recommend leafy greens, people are thinking about a chopped salad. That's fine-ish, right? But there are a lot other ways we want people to eat vegetables like leafy greens. What are your three favorite fiber foods? This is my first opportunity to say lentils. I'm going to say it like 5 or 6 times because I think that's just a great nutritional psychiatry hack. Most Americans don't eat enough plants. Most Americans don't eat enough fruits and vegetables. 70 to 80% of Americans don't meet the RDA for fiber every day. Right? That just comes down to like what fiber foods you like. And if it's like whole wheat bread or metamucil or collace, like that's the wrong answer. It should be lentils. So no. All right. You like to dip what in olive oil? I've been a psychiatrist a long time now in a group like this. Like the rest of you, I can read your minds. You thought bread, didn't you? It's okay. I'm going to be the first psychiatrist that recommends bread to you, right? And I'll show you the amend trial. Increasing the Mediterranean dietary pattern score is about eating more olive oil, eating more plants. And so we'll talk actually an RCT that came out about this. Your seafood meal this week. We love to talk omega-3 fats. A great study, the EASE GED study that Uma was a part of, gave people fish oil along with dietary counseling. You'll see a couple of the trials like that. But what are your seafood meals going to be? You're here in Miami. You're going to have some delicious wild salmon. You have some clams maybe for all the B12. How many CFUs have you eaten this week? Colony forming units. This is when Phil starts to worry I didn't take my meds, but don't worry, they're not colony forming. They're not CFUs from UFOs. They're just fermented foods, right? And this idea that live fermented foods are a new consideration for us. And then bonus as a psychiatrist, like there's a bonus question, right? As an eater, you feel too much guilt about blank and not enough joy about blank. As an outpatient psychiatrist, when I ask people about food, they get very neurotic about calories, fat, saturated fat, and they love to let me know that they drink a lot of red wine to protect their brain. Until last year when that data changed. I've tried to create a lot of work for the public to get them interested in their mental health in case you have to go, these are my power players. And the idea is, you have to come up with a list of foods. I think that's something that Uma and Phil and I in some ways have worked against of, I'm happy to recommend lentils, but if you want to eat black beans or white beans or red beans tonight, I think those are equally helpful for your health and for your microbiome. We made some progress over the past 10 years, right? 15 years ago, when we sort of did these first talks, there wasn't much other than a little correlational data. So I quickly want to go through the data, the big concepts we're talking about, my favorite food categories, and my favorite rhyme: seafood, greens, nuts, and beans. And then I'm going to get out of here. This was the first study, as a group piece, actually not even a study, the Lancet Psychiatry published from the International Society of Nutrition and Psychiatry Research, saying everybody else in medicine gets to think about food. Why don't we? Like, why aren't we saying like, what was Freud's favorite meal? I mean, that should be like a thing in psychiatry, right? And like, what do we say to patients about food? Because right now we don't say anything, and that's a huge mistake, and it's a huge missed opportunity. Big concepts we're talking about when we think about nutritional psychiatry or mental fitness. What are we trying to do? Trying to get people excited about BDNF and neuroplasticity. Most people in the public, when you say psychiatry, they think Prozac and serotonin. And like I joke, it's kind of like Madonna. I like a good Madonna song, just like a prayer comes in Target, I sing along, right? But she's not my favorite musician anymore. Just like serotonin isn't my favorite molecule. I like BDNF, right? This idea that we can grow our brain a little bit, right? Or this notion of neuroplasticity. So big new concept for us in mental health. We don't think this way around treatments, but underlying exercise, ECT, psychotherapy, and nutritional psychiatry is neuroplasticity. Neuroinflammation, right? Ideal, those lentils are going to help us have a less inflamed state. I think this idea gets really abused. And I think in some ways this is just talking about visceral adiposity and the state of nutrition in America. But I think all of you know better than I do, inflammation, probably this group more than any group, inflammation plays a huge role in mental health. And there's a lot that people are doing every day that doesn't help that. What causes inflammation? Well, there's a lot of controversy in this actually. When you look at like, I don't know, the seed oil controversy or omega-6 fats, there's not a lot of data that actually causes inflammation. But certainly the dietary pattern that we're eating seems to contribute in all kinds of ways, as do a lot of other factors of our mental health. I use this phrase mental fitness. I've kind of seen nutritional psychiatry as an element of mental fitness, right? If we were going to have a regimen for our patients to engage in every week, what's most important? Is it more important for them to eat lentils or work on their social isolation or work on their sleep hygiene? I think we should have a few things and just like physical health, be pushing people to build those. And as you can see, lots of things contribute to inflammation, as you know. And then this last big concept, the microbiome, right? All the organisms that live in our gut being the largest part of our immune system. This again gets way overplayed. But that simple distillation, like what does all this science mean? It means people need to eat more fiber in terms of plants, and people should experiment with fermented foods. And some of the data sets, particularly if they're struggling with anxiety disorder or bipolar disorder, so it's just be something that's on the agenda for you as a clinician. Quickly, let's just get into the data. There's way too much to go into in a lot of detail, but we'll start quickly with correlational studies. This was my favorite, the first big one that came out 2009. 10,000 Spanish university students followed for 4.5 years. And no matter what way they sliced the data after 4.5 years, individuals who were in the top half of the class in terms of following a Mediterranean style diet had a 30 to 50% reduction in their risk of depression. That'd be amazing, right? If we could do that, if we can do half of that for incoming freshmen. When you look at these correlational studies together for depression, you see about an 18% reduced risk when people eat a more traditional style diet. So we call that Mediterranean usually, but the same data exists for a Norwegian diet, a Japanese diet. When you stop using kind of cultural notions and you just think about a traditional style diet, you see generally a decreased depression risk. This then leads to these 2016 prevention criteria that I just think our field doesn't know, right? Every single person whose family has depression should hear about these, right? You should hear about exercise. Why? You're at more risk for depression because you have it in your family. And also, these things are great for our aging brain. Nothing surprising here, right? We're not telling anybody some amino acid ratio or to get rid of their gluten. We're just saying, hey, more plants, more seafood, fewer processed foods, fewer things like commercial baked goods. So let's get into the randomized trials. These are exciting. They started in about 2016. The first, or 2017, the first is the SMILES trial. This Felice Jacka, who's really the big research leader in our field. She has over 30 publications this year. Her Food and Mood Academy is where Uma and I are going to retire. If you're looking for us later in our life, we're going to be there cooking. The SMILES trial is really the first trial ever to test a Mediterranean style diet or a dietary intervention at ever in depression. All of these trials, just to quickly say, they're all going to be disappointing in the sense that they're all single blinded because you know whether I'm feeding you pesto or not, especially my pesto. You're going to know a lot of garlic, right? And so that kind of compromises the data. You're going to see we start out here 7 individual counseling sessions. Individuals who have depression, the majority of this population were in treatment and psychotherapy or had a medication on board. And you find a number needed to treat of 4.1 and 32.3% go into full remission. They're like quite striking, right? This idea that maybe what's missing for some patients is we're doing a great job in their therapy with their meds, with their TMS, but they're busy eating a diet of ultra processed foods, and it's kind of not helping the situation. That's followed up about a year and a half later with the Healthy Med trial. This is a group intervention, which I always joke with my wife, be great for my depression every other Tuesday night, go with my Spanish style cooking class, taste olive oils, drink some Rioja, saute some greens together. But what I like about this trial is if you look at who is in this trial, they're very ill. It's very severe depression. And so adding on to some of the support we give to patients, adding in some nutritional support, ideas, cooking classes, all of you who are in day treatment, like patients love this, staff loves this, and it helps. And as you can see, patients, they don't go into remission, they just get better, right? From the edge of hospitalization to being able to maybe be more functional. We have a 45% improvement compared to the social group, which is a 27% improvement. Not all is great in the world of brain food. This is a very large negative trial, the mood food trial. I think it's important to say that nothing worked, whether it was supplements, a multivitamin, counseling, therapies. But I always like to put these in because we need to remember food's just a piece of the puzzle, and so often it gets presented to our patients as like this miracle cure. This was a group of depressed college freshmen in Australia. They showed them a 13-minute video. They called them for two 5-minute phone calls 1 week apart, and they gave them a little box with olive oil, nuts, nut butter, and the spices, cinnamon and turmeric, which I think must have made the dorm smell amazing, right? It's like, what is that, like exotic holiday? It's like, so what happens to these students? I feel like this is like a big pharma chart, but it just shows some minimal is 23 minutes, zero human contact time, and some boxes of food and some recipes and encouragement. And I like this idea. Instead of the freshman 15, we switch this up that when you go to college, we're really going to teach you to take care of yourself. We're going to talk to you about food categories that are important. All right. The Amend trial, this was young men and with depression. Again, challenges our biases. We don't think our young bros are going to do much other than like eat beef for their protein and their pecs. Actually, not true. What the lead researcher, Jessica Bays, said is the men very poignantly would say, "Thank you for seeing me and understanding that I really wanted to talk about this." The intervention was simple: plants they like. What plants do you guys like? Celery, carrots, great. Dip those in hummus. More olive oil, that was that trial that I mentioned earlier, and getting more legumes in their diet. Just with that, 100% of the MEM have decreased symptoms, 36 go into full remission, an 8-point improvement in your Mediterranean dietary pattern score is a 20-point reduction in your back depression inventory. Really interesting trial. I think what connects this and some of the next trials, this trial, which I'm sure Uma's going to talk about because she advised this trial, is you have a really motivated researcher who's doing nutritional counseling and encouraging individuals. But again, just look at this drop in anxiety. This is a 12-week trial, I think 6 sessions. They're getting fish oil and nutritional counseling. I'm going to have to go here in a minute. Ultra processed foods increase the risk. The highest quintile, about a 50% increased risk. Right. So again, simple steps is trying to think about where are processed foods in your diet and where are processed foods in your patient's diet. We've all seen the ketogenic diet kind of movement take hold. Very interesting around severe mental illness. If you are against a keto diet, I really encourage you to check out this trial by Shabani Sethi and the metabolic psychiatry group at Stanford. Note that they had a 36% decrease visceral adiposity. Huge. They have all of their patients, a third of them have metabolic syndrome. None of them at the end of the trial have metabolic syndrome. So they shift in some ways how they do a ketogenic diet. 21% increase in LDL and CRP increased by about 20%. So not all great, but just I think a great example of what is different now about keto. We're not talking about just bacon all day long. These are the numbers which we don't have enough time to get into. This is supposed to ruin French fries for you. Sorry, it's just a very simple slide I put up, which was kind of the new, I think, next set of when we take a correlational study. I'm sure you saw this one. Fried foods increase the risk of anxiety by about 12%. These researchers say why? Why is that? And they get these zebra fish, they give them acrylamide, which is what you create when you make a French fry. Remember the Maillard reaction? And you can just see here, like normal zebra fish, like Finding Nemo, they school together, they go around this unique feature and they check it out. And that's what, as you start dosing them with acrylamide, they don't. And I just think it's a nice example of a single molecule that's now new in our diet. You never ate that much acrylamide, period. Now you do because you eat a lot of French fries. There's a 1,000-fold increase in our soybean oil consumption. How does all this nutritional psychiatry, mental fitness stuff work? I think there are a lot of mechanisms at play, ranging from I'm hanging out with my friends cooking, right, to I'm going to the food co-op or a farmer's market, one of my favorite interventions when I was in New York, to getting rid of all the bad stuff and quelling inflammation, to maybe just getting people, off of some of these molecules that look a little suspicious. We've tried to take this into the clinic and teach a lot of clinicians, which really revolves around wanting people to ask, let's talk about what you eat. and getting curious and building alliance around that. I'm really a big proponent of avoiding dogma. I'm not here to make you a vegan or a carnivore. I'm here to take care of your mental health. If you're a vegan or a carnivore, that's really interesting. Tells me a lot about you and a lot that I need to learn about you, and also tells us some stuff you're probably missing. When you get into what people eat, my patients, it looks like this. This is a slide that says one thing. There's one molecule up here, glucose. This is carbohydrates, the ziti, the pizza, the bun. There's a ton of glucose in the hot dog, right? Just because they put sugar in everything. The rainbow gummy bears. My patients, like you said, eat the rainbow. And what we want to do is come up with these swaps where we're increasing nutrient density, right? More crunch, more colors, more healthy fats like olive oil. And then where do we find these? Laura LaChance, who also was a lead author on the EASE-GAD trial, she and I created this antidepressant food. It's a very simple nutrient profiling system. We looked at the literature in 2018, and there were 12 nutrients that stuck out as having levels of evidence that they prevent or treat depression or help in that process. We just asked what foods have the most of that. And the really big lesson for me as a clinician here was not that like watercress now is why my patients get better than yours. It's that looking at food categories is what matters, right? It doesn't matter whether you eat watercress or kale. What matters is that you think about nutrient density, and that leads you to leafy greens. And whether it's arugula or microgreens or pesto, right? The goal is to try and get you eating more leafy greens, more wild meat, more seafood, and also noticing, like all scales, where are black beans? Where are blueberries? Where are lentils? I mean, this is how you know I'm honest, though. Kale's like way down the list, so I didn't, bias the data. And then quickly, just to end, my little rhyme for you and my patients and the world has been seafood, greens, nuts and beans, and a little dark chocolate. Is when people ask where to start, what to do. Why seafood? Well, seafood and oysters particularly illustrate this idea of nutrient density. How many calories are in an oyster? This is one of the reasons that calorie counting isn't probably the most effective public health strategy, right? 10 calories in an oyster. I didn't know that at all. And just look at all the nutrition you get for 60 calories, right? About 50% of people in America don't meet the daily recommended allowance of zinc. And I think more concerning, most of us don't know where to find that other than a supplement. What are your 8 favorite folate foods? What's your favorite vitamin E food? Where do you get your long chain omega-3 fats besides salmon, sardines, and anchovies? I couldn't answer any of those questions, and they're not hard to answer. But seafood, greens, kale is my spiritual home. I know we're ending soon, and I just need to feel comfortable. But greens teach us again about nutrient density. Nuts, again, patients just have this idea that these are little fat bombs, where you think you've got a little tiny container of olive oil. Doesn't spoil. It's delicious for you. Tons of vitamin E and things like almonds. And the USDA actually tells us 25% of the calories we don't absorb. Lentils, I get to say it again, thank goodness, because look at all that folate, look at all that fiber, and so easy to make lentils, so inexpensive, so delicious. I would say we eat lentils in my house 4 or 5 times a day. I can't fit this into my rhyme, and I've got to step down to let my colleagues, but flavonoids is all about eating the rainbow. Look at your plate. Do you see a variety of colors? Can you add another one? Why is that? And again, Phil's sort of my ego, and Peter Shapiro is my super ego. I don't think Peter's here, but Peter taught me always risks and benefits. And so the challenge was telling people to eat more rainbow vegetables. You all know your CL psychiatrists? That's good. You get a little bit of like hard to like a little tingle in your chest, feels like AFib, and then you can feel it coming down your hands. So you just want to warm patients rainbow finger. This is how you know you're eating enough colorful vegetables. And then dark chocolate again. Why dark chocolate is just very nutrient dense. You get a good dark chocolate, 80%, 70% plus. It's without other stuff in there. The cacao bean is, theobroma is the food of the gods. Lots of iron in there, lots of fiber. And then fermented foods, again, just simple message. Kombucha, kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut. Which ones are you going to try? You need to eat them ideally daily. This study out of Stanford had people eating 6 servings of fermented foods a day. They took them from zero point 0.4 to 6. What happened? If you look down there, what happened is the folks who eat more fermented foods get a more diverse microbiome. They have some decreased signals of inflammation. And I think it's where, again, we're pushing people just fermented, just plants, just plants, just plants. It's kind of missing a piece of the equation. Again, this is Christopher Gardner's group. So let me step down here. Thank you. Can you eat to improve your mental health, and particularly depression? I hope you see that the take home for me has been around dietary pattern and nutrient density, getting away from calories, saturated fat, and cholesterol and salt is my primary message as a clinician. To think about these new phenomena, these new ideas, and get patients excited about them, right? Your brain is growing, BDNF is cool. And then to see there's a lot of data, my team and I try to put out a lot of information for patients and people, ranging from our free newsletter to our free mental fitness kitchen, which is a nutritional psychiatry cooking class that we've had between, I don't know, 50 to up to 1,000 people in there cooking together and talking about these principles. And we also just launched a podcast. The reason Felice Jack is on here, and this is a great episode to hear her talk about this stuff. And again, I hope one of you is very influential and can help me get this into the psychiatric lexicon, the Ramsey Big Five self-assessment. I hope this also helps you all feed your mental health. I'm easy to find. I'm going to step down and let Kitty come on up. Thank you all very much. Oh, Uma, I think, are you next? No. I don't know. Maybe Larry is here. I don't know what you are. Is that one you?
Yeah. I thought you put it in order. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. All right. So the sound will play. You have to click on. So just click. So then what do I do with videos? Okay. Okay, all right. I have a couple of videos, so we were just talking about how to get that done. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm really excited to be part of this wonderful panel, and thank you for inviting us to do this, this talk. My talk today will really focus a little bit on anxiety, but also tips for the CL psychiatrist around what to do at the clinical bedside and things that might help your practice as I've learned them. A little bit about my background and what I do, for those of you who don't know me. And, you know, there's some pretty scary anxiety statistics out there. It turned out that we've known, certainly as psychiatrists, that anxiety is the most common condition. But also, after COVID, a study published in The Lancet showed that it had increased by about 25%, which is one of the reasons that I focused. Like Drew, I'm also an author. My disclosure is that I work with the publishing house, Hachette Book Group, and that's the only disclosure. But also, it led to why I wrote the second book that I did, which is Calm Your Mind with Food. It was really a way to help my patients find ways to use food to feel less stressed and less anxious. But it turns out that, there is a public health crisis. Bad diet is the number one cause of poor health in the US and worldwide. And yet, doctors don't learn nutrition. About 20% of our medical schools, still up until now, don't teach us enough nutrition. And, routinely, doctors just don't learn it. And we don't feel comfortable, therefore, advising on nutrition. So individuals like myself have to take ourselves outside of the medical system to go study it. And still, that there's always a learning curve, even if you studied it. So let's see if we can watch this video together, which will really focus a little bit on the gut-brain connection.
Where we sit right now in history is right at the cusp of a complete paradigm shift in how we think about mental wellness. If we had a problem that we perceived here, it seemed like it made sense that it was in the brain and we should target the brain. And that's what we've been doing for the last 100, 200 years. What we're realizing now is that maybe that isn't our primary target. And what we're seeing here in the brain is a secondary effect of something else that's happening in the body. And what we've just learned in the last 5 to 10 years is that, yes, that is a secondary effect. The primary effect, and therefore the primary target, is in the gut. That's the second brain. That's where we have 100 trillion bacteria in our intestines. That number is more than there are stars in the galaxy, in the Milky Way. So the gut microbiome makes more serotonin than the brain does. That's the feel-good neurotransmitter. It makes more dopamine than the brain. In order for these neurotransmitters in the gut to have their effect in the brain, they have to be able to communicate with each other. And they do that through chemicals that the gut makes, chemicals that the bacteria make, that travel throughout the body, that signal through the nervous system, that signal through the immune system. This idea of the gut-brain axis, targeting the brain, but targeting the second brain in the gut, and then targeting the communication network between them, that axis, that's really the forefront of medicine these days, and the forefront of science, and the forefront of how we're going to actually get ahead of all of these mental wellness issues and have a benefit in people's lives.
So one of the things I want to make sure we understand as I move to the next slide is that this is one of the mechanisms. Certainly, the gut-brain connection is what I focus a lot of my work and research on, but there are other mechanisms as well. And I think just for the sake of inclusion, we want to make sure we understand that it's several different things. Now, can nutrition and lifestyle actually help? You know, I was in several conversations recently, in several interviews recently, where I was told, well, there's some doctors that think this is soft science and it's all woo-woo. And, you know, do you really believe it? And I think the answer to that is we always remain humble. Nutritional science is ever changing. What I can speak to, I think Drew can speak to this as well, is a very large clinical practice where I have seen these interventions really help people. I've seen people improve, and the people who don't improve usually have some element of orthorexia, and I've noticed that clinically, where they really cannot shift any paradigm, even if you meet them where they're at and you try to evolve a nutritional lifestyle plan for them. So, you know, I would argue for myself, based on my experience, based on my research, and based on my review of the literature, that nutrition and lifestyle can help, and metabolism is a huge factor. So these are the things that I've crystallized it down to. Of course, it's always more, and we meet each patient where they're at. Even in my clinic, we've gotten to be much more precise and more personalized in terms of our approaches and the different plans that we put together. Now, you know, some of the things that I want to talk about regarding lifestyle are not the things that you may have heard about before. We've heard that breath work is really important in yoga, but this study actually provided some of the first evidence that for 4 weeks of pranayama yoga, which is breathwork yoga, significantly reduced the levels of anxiety and negative affect, and that these changes were associated with the modulation of activity and connectivity in brain areas involved in emotional processing, attention, and awareness. So it turns out that when someone is anxious, teaching them a breathwork exercise or guiding them towards a reliable YouTube source of breathwork and encouraging them to use that is hugely key. It's something we can teach at the bedside, it's something we can direct them to do, and it's something you can use in your outpatient practice. What I found about the next study I wanted to share was that there's actually this evolving researcher in Japan who's taken Shinrin Yoku, which is forest bathing, and really evolving this into forest medicine. And I say to my patients who live in big cities, I spend some of my time now in New York, and even if you were to spend time in a park or amongst trees or amongst flowers and as close as you can get to a garden, it is definitely going to be positive for your overall well-being, but especially your mental well-being. And they found very exciting things like Shinrin Yoku increases human natural killer activity, the number of NK cells, and the intracellular levels of anti-cancer proteins, suggesting a possible preventive effect on cancers. This research is early, but this is the stuff that's going on in the background. Also, that forest bathing reduces stress hormones such as urinary adrenaline. So, very cool stuff that's happening in the world. And just another point about why these different interventions are potentially very helpful. So I devised this mnemonic. There's a longer mnemonic in my book. And the reason that I thought about it was how do you think about encouraging someone to eat foods in a way that will calm their mind, that will help reduce the anxiety, that will lower it. And the way that I write all of my books, and this was a long conversation with my editors, that I really wanted to include every single reference. So actually the end notes are really thick, but it's meant to be a way that a clinician or a person who's just a regular consumer can look up the research and understand that there's something they can cite. Certainly, a lot of clinicians follow me, and I'm very grateful for that. But it's also a way that they can learn about the research. So if we break it down, the C is for vitamin C-rich foods, all of your citrus fruit. The food richest in vitamin C is actually red bell peppers. Fun fact. Then it's also choline. Choline is predominantly something you can get from eggs, but you can also get it from legumes. Drew talked about a lot of legumes. You can also get it from quinoa. So they're plant-based sources for almost everything. The other C is for something we've talked about and are going to taste today, extra dark natural chocolate. This happens to be a vegan chocolate, I know, but extra dark chocolate, an excellent source of, actually the highest source of plant-based heme. And why did I mention vitamin C? Because vitamin C helps with the absorption of the iron. So really helpful tip to tell patients to eat extra dark chocolate with a piece of citrus fruit, something like clementine and orange, anything like that is really helpful. And it turns out it's important because the World Health Organization has told us that 30% of individuals are iron deficient in the world, including women and children as two of the biggest groups. And iron deficiency is associated with high levels of anxiety, and research has shown that. So just teaching people to eat in a way that will improve these levels over time will be helpful. Then the A is for antioxidants and ashwagandha. So lots of the colors is where you get those antioxidant-rich foods from. Ashwagandha, I've tasted it as a child. There are some Ayurvedic practitioners in my family, and it's very bitter. So it's really helpful to use that as a supplement. L is for liquids, teas or water. Just simple hydration with water makes a very big difference in anxiety. M is for more omega-3s and magnesium. It turns out, like zinc, many Americans are actually low in magnesium. So just a helpful way to include that. And S is for spices and herbs, as well as just understanding that dry spices are something that are shelf stable. A pure spice has no calories, usually 0 calories, and especially if there's no salt or anything else added, you're actually in pretty good shape to use that as a great seasoning. So understanding these are very important. The other bedside tip that I have is something you can use in your outpatient practice, but also something you can teach someone at the bedside. The SAW. SAW is basically swap, add, or walk. And the swap is take one unhealthy food that you're eating. I've literally asked this of patients at the bedside. I've also used it in my outpatient clinic. Take one food, because I've learned the hard way that when you give someone a list of 10 things, it's too overwhelming. But if you ask them to do one of these 3 things and just start with either swapping, adding more vegetables, legumes, fiber-rich foods, antioxidant-rich foods, they can add something that is lacking in their diet, and you can help them figure that out. And walk is for the broad category of whether it's you do yoga, whether you love to walk, whether you do HIIT exercise, whatever it might be, these are ways to start moving. And I think all of these, we know there's a huge body of literature that's ever changing and showing us that exercise is so good for mental well-being. So it's really easy to use these kinds of tips with people. So what are the nutritional targets? There are things like prebiotic foods, adding things like garlic leek, onions, and jicama to our diet, fermented foods, and indicating to someone and helping them understand that every culture has a fermented food. So just having that or starting with small bits of fermented foods if they're not used to it is a great way to go. Talking to them about clean proteins, adding in spices and herbs. These are simple steps that they can take. Someone told me recently, I should focus a lot on that. It would be helpful, not that I should focus, but it would be helpful for people to just have simple tips. And so I try to think about it in that way when I work with my patients, because sometimes they just need to know, doctor, what do I need to do? Cleaning up the standard American diet. Well, that's a long story that's going to take us the rest of our lives. But can we help people, individuals, one at a time? Teaching people simple things about food labels, simple facts about how to select foods is really helpful and very powerful. And then breaking it down for them, telling them, that there are these studies that have shown, for example, that fried foods have a horrible effect on our mental health. It's no big surprise. And I say to my patients, that doesn't mean, if you're rushing through an airport, as I was the other day, I didn't find fast food or eat that. But if you happen to be and you've not eaten lunch and you've missed a flight, and that's something that you need to eat, it's okay, because the rest of the time, practice that 80-20% rule of, eating healthy most of the time and something may not go well. This study actually was done in mice, but it proved that this thickener called carboxymethyl cellulose actually affects the metabolome and leads to a low production of short chain fatty acids. So I think it's important to understand that hopefully we will get to do these in humans as well, but that there's evidence building around, the fact that food stabilized colorants, dyes, and the kind of junk that are found in these foods is not good for us. Understanding sugar. 4 grams of sugar is 1 teaspoon. I teach all of my patients that. So if they read a food label, they understand the number of teaspoons. A half a cup of yogurt can have 7 teaspoons of added sugar. But a plain yogurt with some added berries and cinnamon is a good way to go. So we've both experienced this, I think, in our practices, because you tell people to eat the rainbow. Someone literally brought me a piece of this cake once. So it's important to be specific. In your recommendations, someone also told me once, well, Dr. Knight, you're asking me to eat more vegetables. So I started eating more pizza and Coke because, they're both vegetables or they're both vegetarian foods. So patients actually always learn so much from them. But simple ways, we had hoped in this session to do a little bit of a demo. That wasn't possible. My slides are not advancing. It's sorry, the whole thing pulled down, so it's not. Okay. Sorry about that. I think we can go back. So this really was my attempt. We had hoped to do a cooking demo, which there were very many efforts to do that, and unfortunately it didn't work. But thinking about how to build a flavorful plate, and where I think it's important to remember the words here, sort of you can build delicious food. Think about the diversity of colors, flavors, and textures. Things like nuts and seeds, healthy fats, spices, fresh herbs and berries are just a way to think about it. I will challenge, my patients to not only work with their kids and bring their kids to the supermarket or the farmer's market or wherever they get their vegetables, to pick those colors and choose these different vegetables and choose the different herbs and spices that they can add to a colorful plate, along with the clean protein of their choice. So I think it's important to understand that people just need that people need some flexibility. I'm not sure what's going on with this, so. Can we put it in presenter mode so I can just click from there? There's one tiny video, so we can maybe change it back. This is not allowing me to hit forward. Sorry. You won't be able to just be able to advance the slide because it's not advancing. Well, just go into presentation mode and use the tablet.
Sure. Fine.
Slideshow. Thank you. So sorry about that. Not quite sure what happened. All right, so we talked about how to build this plate. Let's try to finish up. So another idea is how do you think about, putting together healthy foods for your kids and family? So the bento box idea is really a cool one. You can get these sustainable bento boxes now. And I happen to like these a lot because they allow for you to portion control, help, feed your kids well, teach them sustainability at the same time, along with, kind of a sustainable water bottle and that type of thing. So just ideas for how do you implement these ideas around healthy eating and healthy foods. Now, there's a lot of food wars and diet dilemmas going on. I think that those of us who work with media really try hard or have a presence on social media really try hard to message around what may be considered boring, but how to eat healthy and how to include normal foods in your diet. Whether you vegan, plant-based, carnivore, or following the new, most exciting diet trend that you found or read about, it's really not about that because I feel that those just are not sustainable for people. And I think that just helping someone understand that if they're carnivore, maybe they could eat some vegetables, but if they're plant-based, what are the ways that they can get in vitamin B12, which is lacking in which is lacking in a vegan diet, and where can they get that? And nutritional yeast is one of the answers to that question. So just understanding that and helping people navigate the types of food wars and diet dilemmas out there are important. The other thing about when we talk about food is we have to think about, whether people have access. One of the best lessons I learned was in culinary school, we learned food costing. One of the conversations I have with parents in my practice, whoever the person is that's preparing the food, is that they will save money by buying a rotisserie chicken if they eat chicken, because it's often just cooked in its own fat in the supermarket, and you can actually call up or ask a supermarket what they cook it in. And for 3 days, a family with little children can feed them with actual food by adding in salads, lentils, greens, making a soup on one day, using that rotisserie chicken in 3 different ways, and you teach a mom or show a family how to do that. It's actually more cost effective than buying, one of the fast food meals for those children over 3 days, which we know is not actually food. But helping a mom understand that or family is very important. So, is it only about the food? Well, I would argue that it's not. If anything, it's how we eat, the context in which we eat. That's where I like work from the Blue Zones diet. So the Power Nine talks about a sense of community, talks about eating with others, talks about these factors, and I think it's very powerful. I feel that it's something, I'd love to share with my patients. So, I wanted to also share, and again, I apologize for this break because it feels like I had to skip over a lot, but I wanted to share sort of the new frontiers of where we are moving to. I feel like Drew does and others, a certain responsibility, not only about doing the research, but also bringing this field forward and helping people, helping clinicians, helping us use it in whether it's CL psychiatry or in an outpatient practice. So some of the things that I'm up to include the following. So, on a mental health task force with the United Nations, being part time in New York helps that. World Economic Forum, being part of a nutrition task force, was invited to teach a brain health class on masterclass, which actually now will go to more areas and be shown to more people and talk about things like the gut brain connection, the science behind it, and actual recipes that help people. I still work with the College of Medicine. We are building out and working on the right book for the APA. And in the Division of Nutrition, just published the first text actually intended for medical students, but honestly is written by our faculty, and I think is particularly helpful. We've gotten in several chapters there on nutritional psychiatry, but it's really to help people have more resources, because one of the things that people ask me about all the time is how and where to get some resources, and that I think would be helpful to know. Um, Masterclass. And then something about the courses. We have a couple of courses at Mass General, asynchronous learning through the Mass General Psychiatry Academy, intended for clinicians and CME based, which pretty much anyone can do. And it's not just for physicians, it's not just for psychiatrists, it really is for clinicians who interface with patients. We created the first elective in our residency program and have been teaching nutritional psychiatry for a few years in our PGY3 curriculum. And despite all our interruptions, don't forget that there's always joy in food. These are some of my books. Most importantly, my call to action to all of you is to join the work that we're doing. Follow my newsletter, follow the work that I do, like you do, like with Drew as well. It's one way to actually learn and understand the resources. And again, I apologize for the interruption. I'm not sure what happened with with our tech, but we fixed it. Thanks.
Hi, thanks for coming. I'm trying to get my phone up here so that I don't go over time. I'm Kitty Garza. I'm an assistant professor at Columbia, and I'm here to talk with you today about social media nutrition and things we should know as CL psychiatrists. I have nothing to disclose. I'm hoping by the end of my talk, you will develop an appreciation for the types of issues that might arise from patients acquiring their nutritional information from online social media sources. I'm hoping that you'll develop a basic framework for what to consider when assessing a patient's dietary practices, particularly if they're practicing a diet that they found on social media. And I hope that you'll have some more comfort in engaging patients around nutrition-related topics while being mindful of potential social, cultural, and psychological influences that might compel patients to adopt certain dietary practices. So I was just curious, how many of you use social media? Show of hands. Okay. And how many of you use social media to acquire information about health and diet? Okay, so like a fair amount of you. So we're not alone. Social media is everywhere. It's 4.7 billion, or about 60% of the global population uses social media daily. 72% of adults in the United States use at least one social media outlet. An estimated 90% of Americans use social media for health information, and more than half of people will turn to social media as their initial source of health information. So there are pros and cons to this. I'm sure you're aware of some of these pros and cons. Social media has democratized access to health knowledge and aided in dissemination of high quality evidence-based medicine, like some of the studies that Drew and Uma discussed just a few minutes ago. Social media has reduced healthcare costs by providing patients with accessible information and has bolstered some patients' confidence and ability to self-manage chronic illnesses. But the major downside, as I'm sure you're all aware, is that there's some challenges in being able to identify trustworthy, high-quality sources of this information. And there have been a lot of issues with disinformation and misinformation that have become apparent with the pandemic. And most users have a very limited ability to discern what is good quality information. And there are some studies that I've referenced here, one looking at 5 popular nutrition hashtags on Instagram that found that less than 1% of the posts were considered good quality. There's another study in 2023 looking at YouTube videos, many of which were actually created by physicians and dietitians, but there were not a lot that were categorized as good or excellent by certain measures that are used to evaluate this information. There's also a systemic review in 2022 looking at 64 articles that assess the quality of nutritional information found online. And they found that 62.5% of the information found on social media is classified as poor, particularly if it's related to weight loss and to supplements. So I'm curious, like, how would you assess the quality of information that you find in these spaces? There have been tools that have been proposed for evaluating online health content and nutritional content, but there isn't yet like a standardized and easy to use instrument. Many of the studies that I looked at related to quality of social media evidence use this instrument called the Discern instrument that was developed in 1999 for judging the quality of online written consumer health information on treatment choices. And it's been adapted to evaluate quality of social media health content as well as nutritional content in the form of posts and videos as well. There's a lot going on in this slide, but to summarize, in 2023, the National Academy of Medicine, in conjunction with a council comprised of representatives from the World Health Organization and the Council on Medical Specialty Societies, published a paper that came out of an advisory committee trying to help social media companies, trying to guide them as to how to identify credible sources of health information and how to combat misinformation and disinformation. And the basic gist is that over several phases, they came up with 4 fundamental principles of credibility for online sources, which is that reliable online sources should be science-based, objective, transparent and accountable, and equitable and inclusive. And they develop different standards for nonprofit versus for-profit entities and for individuals, and that are delineated here. You could look at them later if you like. Then these criteria sound very reasonable. Things like disclosing what your credentials are and identifying posts that are sponsored, so on and so forth. But as you can see, with the sheer volume of posts that are generated on each social media platform per day, per second, like who has the time to carefully vet each post that come in? I know the platforms certainly don't have the resources to vet the content at the rate at which it's being uploaded. So what can we do about this? Even if platforms can't vet information for themselves, I figured that we could apply some of these 4 guiding principles by the National Academy of Medicine to health-related social media posts that we encounter, and perhaps provide some guidance for our patients as well. So again, to review, these principles are: is this content science-based, objective, transparent and accountable, and inclusive and equitable? When we're specifically evaluating dietary information, we can also consider the USDA recommended guidelines for healthy eating. There are a lot of diets that Drew and Uma mentioned, including Mediterranean style eating, different traditional forms of eating, the DASH diet, so forth. And the USDA is shying away from endorsing any particular diet or giving quantitative information as to exactly what to eat, but they're providing more qualitative advice. Like you want fruits and vegetables to take up half of your plate, whole grains to take up another portion of your plate, to limit red meat, vary your protein intake, vary your vegetables, and to switch to lower fat dairy products, and choose less processed foods like with added sugar, sodium, and so on and so forth. So let's keep these principles in mind when we're evaluating diets. And I figured I might have to fly through this part. Let's see, this is a video. I don't know how to get it to play. Hold on one second. But I have some interesting examples here who were recommended by Drew. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get this to play, which is fine. But do any of you guys know this person by any chance?
2018 before analysis.
Oh my gosh, please. Who can you say, who is this? That's the Liver King. Okay. Oh no, now I'm stuck. The curse has followed me. So, all right. I can just talk off the cuff. Oh, there he is.
There'd be like chicken Alfredo, watermelon Alfredo, a little sweet potato Alfredo, some ribs Alfredo, Alfredo, potato, potato. Fucking evolve. It's a metaphor for life. This is what I'm gonna have for dinner today. I got some bone marrow in there. When you add that to the skillet, that gets cooking. A little bit of fresh raw testicle. Still doing it every single day. Where be my liver? Holy shit! The truth is, I haven't had liver.
I think we can move on. You get the picture. So this is the Liver King, aka Brian Johnson. He's a social media influencer with over 10 million followers across TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And he promotes an ancestral lifestyle, like eating what our ancestors ate, I suppose, which he says consists of lots of raw meat and organs. I don't really know how he asked them, given, I guess speculating. And he's really into liver, which is why he's the Liver King. He has no health credentials or training, and he claimed that his physique that you saw there is due to him following this ancestral diet. Although eventually it came out that someone had the receipts that he was spending like $11,000 a month on anabolic steroids and testosterone, which he neglected to disclose. So we can, if we want to be systematic about it, we can apply the rubric that I described earlier to his claims. Like, what is he eating here? Is it science-based? Like, I guess, you saw that he was eating some non-processed foods. There's some watermelons and things like that. So like, that was like pretty good. But the fact that he's eating a lot of liver, which if he's eating this liver every day, could cause vitamin A toxicity. I'm not exactly sure. And I'm also not really sure what the goals that he's promoting are. Is it weight loss, longevity, to build muscle and look bulky? I don't know. I know an organ meat heavy carnivore diet probably isn't awesome for your cardiovascular health, but I mean, you can look at the rest of the criteria here. We should also mention that a lot of his income comes from people following him and clicking on his social media and also buying his supplements. He is like a supplement empire, which includes processed nutrition bars. And then is it inclusive and equitable and sustainable? Like, I'm not really sure where one would acquire this amount of organ meats. I don't know why I'm not able to advance the slide. Sorry. I have more videos coming up, so I don't know. It seems like those are the ones that are problematic. Oh, I'm sorry. Is there something I could do to rectify the situation or? Okay. We're starting over. I can skip the, I can skip the videos. Can I go back to the view I was in before? I can't be indecisive. Sorry.
It's frozen.
No, I know. The Liver King sabotaged my presentation. Okay. It's okay. It's okay. I don't need to play the videos. I know. I cast no aspersions, no judgment. And no judgment if you follow any of these people either, because I also am guilty of following certain people just out of lurid curiosity. I was also going to talk about the medical medium. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. Does anyone know who this guy is? Yeah. Yeah. So he's been on the Kardashians and a bunch of other places, but his deal is he said he has no health credentials whatsoever, but he says since he was 4, he was visited by the spirit that gives him dietary advice. So he can scan people and know if they have cancer or not, and he can tell them what to eat. And he was responsible for single-handedly starting the celery juice trend because the spirit told him to drink the celery juice. So here's a very kind of animated video about aloe vera.
Ulcers, H. pylori. Did anybody get that?
Okay, it's too much. But he has 5 million followers across platforms, and he's also a New York Times bestselling author. And so again, we could apply the rubric to him, think about this. And then I would encourage, there's one last person, but I want to get to like a more high yield case that we can discuss. So there's also Paul Saladino. Are you familiar with him? Okay. Right. So he's a physician, and not just any physician. He's one of our own. He's a psychiatrist. And he's friends with the
Here is
Liver
that,
King.
I guess in 2018.
This is like I'm sorry, I just know we're short on time, so I'm going to skip over this. He has over 3 million followers across various social media platforms and is also a New York Times bestselling author. And his deal is, instead of plant-based diet, he promotes an animal-based diet. He is anti-vegan, so he's Drew Ramsey's arch nemesis. He wears shirts that say like kale is bullshit, and he's very anti-vegetables because he says that they cause autoimmune disease. So again, no, like, so we have to think about, like, he's a doctor, and our patients, I bring up these cases because they all have millions of followers. So our patients are finding advice, seeing that they're followers and feeling like it's legitimate. So I wanted to make this high yield for us and think about, why should we care about this as CL psychiatrists? And I wanted to talk about a case that I saw in the consult service that really demonstrates how influential social media can be and how deleterious an impact it can be on a patient's health. So the gist of these slides, which I'm going to fly through now in the interest of time, is I saw this patient, Mr. R, with no formal medical or psychiatric history, in his 30s, who came in with dizziness and rectal bleeding. And he attributed the problem to constipation that he experienced after eating undercooked quinoa. On exam, he was found to be hypotensive and very thin with a BMI of 18.2. And he had many lab abnormalities, and I really want to highlight that he had profound hypocalcemia and B12 deficiency. Basically, his B12 was undetectable on labs, and low vitamin D, also undetectable. And it was thought that this low calcium state had induced hyperparathyroidism, which was contributing to bone breakdown and also resulting in elevated alk phos. And the medicine service wanted to know if I thought that he might have an eating disorder. So in my interview, Mr. R reported that 18 months prior, following the death of his father from multiple myeloma, he researched diets that would prevent malignancy and protect his bone health. And he found the alkaline diet, and it really resonated with him, so he decided to go for it. During this period, he lost 60 pounds. He first learned about the alkaline diet on Reddit. He now belongs to a bunch of alkaline diet groups, including discussion groups on Facebook that have hundreds of thousands of followers. And he identified the kind of alkaline diet foremost authority whose advice he follows as this person named Dr. Sebi. When I asked him what these dietary practices consisted of, he said that he doesn't eat any meat or animal products, as they are considered to be acidifying in the body. He only ate certain fruits and vegetables that are alkaline, including berries, mango, avocado, and sea moss. And he had been eating 3 meals a day, but 3 months ago had read that combining the alkaline diet with fasting could like super boost him. And so now he's only eating 1 meal a day, which consists of drinking vegetable juice. He also reported that this was an economic decision because the sea moss supplements that Dr. Sebi recommends are very expensive and he can't really afford them. So what I wanted to highlight here in the rest of his history is that he immigrated from a Latin American country and then dropped out of high school due to bullying and had become unemployed and withdrawn and reclusive in the setting of his father's death. He spends most of his time indoors, so no sun exposure, no vitamin D exposure, chatting with people on Reddit and Facebook who follow this alkaline diet, and he's become very skeptical of family members who don't follow the diet. He calls them ignorant and uneducated. So Mr. R does not currently have any concerns about his shape, weight, or body image, and denied trying to intentionally ever lose weight, and in fact said that he would like to regain some of the weight that he had lost. He did, however, report having poor sleep and associated daytime fatigue, and said that he had become accustomed to eating less since he had been in this fasting phase of his diet. Otherwise, he denied other psychiatric symptoms on review of symptoms. Salient points related to his mental status exam: he had this very odd, superficially bright affect And his thought process was very concrete and perseverative. He wanted to talk about the alkaline diet to the exclusion of all other topics and had a lot of magical thinking surrounding the alkaline diet. So my diagnostic impression was that he did not have an eating disorder that I was aware of in the DSM-5. And the story did concern me because it sounded like he had become unemployed and was exhibiting a lot of isolative behaviors following his father's death. And it made me worried that maybe he was having some kind of depressive disorder. Also, he had the strong conviction in the alkaline diet and lacked reality testing around it. So there was a question of whether this patient was delusional. Now, I should mention, once the team became aware of this, they confronted him with the lab abnormalities and tried to suggest, do you know, maybe the alkaline diet might have something to do with some of these abnormalities? And the patient actually doubled down and said, you know, the reason I have these lab abnormalities is because I ate acidic for so long. And if I keep eating this alkaline diet, you'll see, like, I will cure myself. And the dietitian met with the patient and tried to encourage him to liberalize his diet, which he refused, and the food trays would just go uneaten. And he maintained that if he continued to just do this diet, that everything would be fine. So then at this point, I figured that we needed to do something different and did a deep dive into the alkaline diet and learned, tried to understand what it was about. And it's basically based on this theory that certain foods, or even drinking alkaline water, can alter your pH levels, and having an alkaline environment in your body can prevent cancer. And this came from in vitro data that shows that acidic environments can grow tumor cells. But there's also no data that shows that you can alter your serum pH levels with your diet alone, and certainly no clinical data that shows that the alkaline diet prevents or cures cancer. There have been some small studies more recently looking at incorporating alkaline diet along with alkalinizing therapies like taking bicarbonate while you're receiving chemotherapy that were positive, but these are really small studies looking at pancreatic and some lung cancers, and this is not generally something that's recommended by cancer societies. So then I also looked at what the alkaline diet was comprised of, and there's actually a variety of plant-based foods that they recommend that the patient didn't say he was eating. It's mostly like chickpeas and quinoa. So then I looked into Dr. Sebi, who, the patient thought was an authority on this topic, and discovered that he was neither a doctor nor named Sebi. I don't know where Sebi came from, but he was a self-proclaimed healer from Honduras who was working in LA and in New York. And he claimed that the alkaline diet would cure all diseases, including cancer and AIDS. And he was actually charged with practicing medicine without a license in the state of New York and was arrested for money laundering. And he eventually died in police custody in Honduras. And all of his followers online believed that his death was a conspiracy and that he had discovered all these cures to all these diseases and was being silenced by Big Pharma. So then I tried to talk with Mr. R in a kind of motivational interviewing kind of way to understand what it was about the alkaline diet that was appealing to him. And I learned that he had seen claims that alkaline diet improves bone health and prevents cancer. And because his father had passed away from cancer, he was concerned about his own risk. He also doesn't trust doctors because the doctors had not been able to save his father. And he kind of likes the idea of being able to have some autonomy and control his own health through his diet. Mr. R thought that Dr. Sebi was a credible source because he'd seen that there were thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people that follow him online, and celebrities like Michael Jackson and John Travolta had, while he was alive, followed him and subscribed to these beliefs. He also had like an identification with Dr. Sebi as like an immigrant and someone who was like maligned by like mainstream sources, he himself having had the experience of being bullied. And also, due to Mr. R having a limited formal education, it kind of seemed like he liked being an authority in something and felt like this self-study was really gratifying to him, and being able to feel like he could educate family members and other people about it was very gratifying. And he also was a very isolated young man and felt like he had limited social connections on the outside, and that he enjoyed having an online community of people where he could talk about the alkaline diet and feel a sense of belonging. So basically, we tried to think about what was positive about the alkaline diet. As you saw, it promotes plant-based foods, whole foods, non-processed foods. So we said, okay, this might not be that bad. So we tried to conceptualize him as someone who follows a vegan, plant-based diet and aligned with his goals of eating whole foods and increasing his weight. So he agreed to resume eating 3 plant-based meals a day because he recognized that he was underweight and that his labs were abnormal. And we increased his food repertoire, looking at what alkaline foods were acceptable, and tried to encourage him to take in more protein, like Uma and Drew, were discussing when they do assessments as well, and thinking about some calcium sources, and then also to consider taking ongoing supplementation. And while in the hospital, he did agree to take calcium, vitamin D, B12, and folate. And we also encouraged him to take a little bit of olanzapine at bedtime to help with the sleep and appetite, though, I was kind of hoping it would help with his thought process as well. And eventually his labs normalized and we were able to discharge him home. So the lessons I learned from treating this very challenging patient was to ask your patient about their dietary practices, because there are factors that might have influenced them gravitating towards a particular diet, including cultural or spiritual beliefs, particular anti-authority concerns, so on and so forth, that might have influenced this, to try to understand not only what their diet promotes, but how they're implementing it, because there was a discrepancy between what this diet was recommending and how he was implementing it. Thinking again at what is missing or what the patient might be over consuming, and thinking about macronutrients and micronutrients and how to intervene. And then considering whether, and then kind of just maintaining a very curious, non-judgmental stance and having some humility about what's going on with your patient and their social media and use. So in summary, I have like a slide here that might be helpful when you're meeting a patient. We have the National Academy of Medicine principles regarding evaluating the legitimacy of the health information you're finding on social media, as well as USDA guidelines of what the diets of patients of everyone should include. And then from my clinical experience, to think about what dietary patterns your patient subscribes to, what they're actually eating, what's appealing about the diet for them, why are they adopting this diet now, and which food groups are they missing or over consuming. And I want to thank you for your attention.
So there are 2 lessons to be learned. When you put together any sort of a panel, make yourself the last speaker. And when you make yourself the last speaker, make sure that you can give your talk in 5 minutes or less. And if you can't do that, then be sure you upload your slides. So I have uploaded my slides, so you can see them online. And there's a reason I uploaded the slides. And I have no disclosures about this. And in terms of diversity, all beings on this planet contain DNA. And all beings, that includes amoeba and germs, right, are therefore subject to influences that can cause epigenetic or genetic changes. And if you believe in evolution, we're here because of genetic changes, or we'd all be amoeba. Let's start with the bad news. There's always money to be made. And if you don't, I do social media, just as Kitty said, but most of my social media is the New York Times, which sometimes is a credible site. Almost every week, sometimes many times a week, there will be an article in the New York Times about diet and lifestyle. So this is the one that was a few weeks ago. This one was last week. Did anyone see this article? $20,000. Now, Canyon Ranch is a really good place to go. For those of you who have never done it, do it at least once, because it's fun. But they don't just sell massage, which they do. They sell lifestyle. They profile you. Some will cut your hair and tell you what's good or bad. And so in this, they had 6 places. The 6th one was the Canyon Ranch. I forget which state it was in, but it's $20,000. So there's money to be made in this, as you can see, and there's danger that can be made in this, as Mr. R shows, in people who aren't equipped to rationally think through the information. And that, by the way, includes us. And so what I decided to do was try to learn something about epigenetics. And I'm going to go through most of this stuff quickly. And that's why the slides have been uploaded, right? So that you can see it. So what's epigenetics? Epigenetics is stuff that doesn't affect the DNA, right? So the DNA remains intact. But what the DNA is there to do and all of the coding and responsible for everything that goes on in us every minute of every day can be altered by influences on those genes, turning a gene on, turning a gene off. And the places where that happens are called marks, which is a very funny sort of term for those of you who gamble. That it's an interesting way. And marks change the conformation of chromatin DNA, right? Compacting it, opening up. Now you say, oh, compacting it is bad. Opening up is good. No, compacting it might be good. Opening up might be bad. It is what that will translate to in a protein, and therefore what happens in our body isn't good or bad in the DNA. It's what happens to it. And a lot of things can affect it. And you have actually heard about these things. What I'm going to try to do is, to some extent, show how this actually happens. So there's methylation, right? That's adding or subtracting a CH3 group, and we'll come to that. Changing your histone, right? And I love these terms. I had no idea what the acetylation. I love simulation, right? I thought that's when you get that white dog, right? And it licks your face and it loves you, and so everything is good, right? And then these funky non-coding mRNAs. So there's RNA, right? And mRNAs, but there are non-coding mRNAs and there are miRNAs, and they just mess things up, but they don't actually code. I'm not really going to go through this except for the stuff I put in blue. Okay, so acetylation, very important. But why does it matter? Well, because we know that problems with acetylation can lead to obesity and type 2 diabetes. That's how it translates. It's not just something happening in the DNA. Methylation, these are 5 crucial steps, by the way. Every single one of these is important. No one is more important than the other. That abnormal methylation can lead to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And for those of you here, that is a far more common disease than is alcoholic liver disease, and is a far more common route to the need for liver transplantation than is alcoholic liver disease. And what's the primary cause of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? Obesity. But people get it even without having obesity. So for those of you who are in the transplant world, or even those of us who are not, we think it's all alcoholism. It's not. It's metabolism and biology. Phosphorylation, again, you can see how often diabetes shows up here. And metabolic things show up. So phosphorylation contributes to type 2 diabetes, ubiquination, which I thought was everyone getting together, right? And talking good stuff, turns out to be involved in phenylketonuria. And finally, simulation, which does not have to do with very cute white dogs, contributes to the metabolic syndrome. And of course, in our field, for many of the drugs that we use and patients need, it puts them at risk for metabolic syndrome because it also changes their dietary choices. This is from a very difficult paper that I rejected 5 times because A, I didn't understand it, and I kept saying to them, I'm not dumb. If I can't understand this, then it's not a good paper. You have to keep going back to the authors and saying, make it accessible to someone who's got a reasonable brain in his head, right? And it's now been published, right? And they kept working at it and working at it and working at it. But I loved this particular graphic because we isolate these things. That's not how the body works. Everything's happening all at once in our bodies. Everything's happening all at once in the cells. So it's it's both puzzling and it's a puzzle. This is stuff that we know. What's the most famous study that was done on maternal nutrition? World War II. Everyone knows this. What was the incidence of schizophrenia in women who were starved when the Nazis surrounded the Netherlands? Those women who were starved during the war gave birth to children, many of whom were far above the 1% of schizophrenia. That's the natural cause. Certain dietary things, such as broccoli, which I happen to love, raw. I don't like cooked broccoli. Cauliflower, which I happen to love. Bok choy, okay. Soy, okay. But these have been shown to modulate epigenetic marks. And I want to come back to modulate, not good, not bad, influence. And aging. Kitty and I actually talk about this a lot. The intermittent diet, I'll talk a little bit about metformin, but it does seem clear that there are things, particularly in mice, absolutely, maybe some in monkeys, I think macaques, and some data in humans. But remember, the real data in those humans will come in 100 years because they can't have died yet. So when you go through this and you look at these various processes, what we see is a lot of different things that we can modulate and that we do, thinking or not thinking about modulating them, then has an influence epigenetically. Again, how those genes translate themselves into proteins, which is how it works, and what those proteins do in terms of cell health, cell death, modulation, et cetera, in the body. So as you look at this, I want you to think, oh, what do I do here? And what don't I do here? If you don't like broccoli, it's perfectly okay. George Bush didn't like broccoli, but a lot of us didn't like George Bush. So what we do with this depends on our lifestyle. And the four of us have talked about this a lot. I never tell patients to diet because you're done. I tell them, and I hate the term lifestyle too. How do you eat? What do you like to eat? What don't you like to eat? When patients say, the medication made me fat. And I say, if you just took medication and nothing else, you would not be fat. You would be dead. So it's food that makes you fat. And how you eat should fit into a way that's, I think Uma said this, should be pleasurable. Because eating, and you see this, how many of your patients are on one of the GLP drugs? How many of them talk about how much it sucks to have no appetite at all and how much they love being thin? Right? And where's the tension there? Right? They love, I'm getting into something I haven't worn in 10 years, but I have no appetite. Food's not fun. Food's supposed to be fun. And we'll come to the chocolate in a minute. We're going to talk about ultra-processed foods. Lots of people have talked about ultra-processed foods, right? So ultra-processed foods are bad for you. Why? Because they change our gut, right? And that is not good. And you've heard today, I don't know if you heard James Kimball talk about it, Uma talked about it. The gut is an extremely important thing. Who discovered that the gut was the second brain? Mike Aronson at Columbia, 50, somewhat 60 years ago, where he said the P cells, I don't know if you remember that, you have to have gone to medical school a long time ago. The P cells contain serotonin. And people said to him, he was a young PhD, I don't know what you're talking about. And he was the person who took little pieces of mice or rat gut, I don't remember, and you put a pellet in it and dropped a little Prozac on it. And for some, the pellet sped through, and for some, the pellet didn't move. And he said, depending on the animal, serotonin may enhance gut motility, may decrease gut motility, but the gut runs on serotonin. Right? And he said the gut is a completely different nervous system on its own. It influences the brain and the brain influences it. It was really quite genius when you think about it. But the other thing about ultra-processed foods is they don't contain a lot of nutrition. And I'm going to come back to what we really mean by ultra-processed foods in a minute. So, you eat a bag of chips, they're great, right? But then you're not really so hungry. I did an experiment before coming here. I typically have yogurt in the morning with fruit. And I did an experiment after my grandchildren visited, and we ended up with 4 large boxes of Cheerios that had not been consumed. And I started eating Cheerios in the morning. They're addicting. When I get up, I have coffee, I have breakfast. I got up and I wanted to have Cheerios. And I said, wow, this is amazing. And I love having breakfast. I'm a breakfast eater. I wanted to have Cheerios. Right? And I realized, wow, it's exactly what they say about ultra-processed foods. They are engineered by very, very smart chemists in the same way as the first person who figured out opium feels good, and then the second person who figured out you could sell it. Right? These foods are engineered, And if you're not careful, you get addicted. They do, because of the high level of sugar and all the other crap that's put in to make it taste good, cause oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is bad for cells. Pure and simple. And we're subjected to it all the time. There are so many things that cause oxidative stress in our bodies. And finally, that the foods contribute to inflammation. And several people have mentioned it, but the final common pathway of much of what is bad for us is inflammation. And what's the most powerful neuroendocrine organ in the brain? And it is the brain, right? It's a neuroendocrine organ. It controls the rest of the body, not just by neurons, but by influencing the endocrine system, because it controls the endocrine system. So this is a really cool slide. And it turned out many years ago, this guy, Carlos Monteiro in Brazil, came up with the NOVA system, which doesn't mean anything, by the way. It's not an acronym. He called it the NOVA system. And he said, and I want you to look at this, this is good for you or not? Worse for you or not? Even worser for you or not? Even terrible. And what he said is, processed means you've changed it from whatever its natural form is into something else. It doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. So as you look at the stuff up here, there's a lot of stuff that we think is good. One of the things that Chef Boulet taught me was fermented butter, and how important fermented butter is, which is typically European butter, from American butter. And I will tell you that every time I would visit him, because my wife was addicted to his butter, I would say, Chef, can I get a container of butter? And he would give me a container of butter every time, until he told me one time, well, you know, they have it at Wegmans. I said, what are you talking about? He was a consultant to Wegmans. I don't think a lot of people knew that. He said, Butter Boy butter is French fermented butter that Wegmans brings in. It's really good. And so now I can go to Wegmans and get Butter Boy butter. And he said fermented foods are different. So do you think of butter as a processed food? Well, it is. Have you ever made butter? It's processed. Yeah, put the heavy cream in the Cuisinart. You whoosh, 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 whoosh. Butter and buttermilk. It's a processed food. Down at the bottom is ice cream. What is unique about ice cream? As someone who makes ice cream, he eats actually quite a bit of ice cream. Ice cream is one of the only foods, along with donuts, that mimics the sugar-fat ratio of breast milk. There are no natural things in the world that mimic it. We process foods, and ice cream has the exact ratio of fat to milk as does mother's milk. And donuts. So when you think of processed, ultra-processed, good and bad, there are a lot of things on here that are ultra-processed that we don't think of. I don't think of ice cream as bad. I think of ice cream as a necessary food group. And this is like, some of this stuff I've obviously taken right from the internet on purpose, because you can see, you look at some of this. So where is it? Bread. There's one of the things here that talks about, bad is potato chips. Tasty, but bad. Tortilla chips better, but make it yourself pita chips. It's still just a processed food that you've dried out, so that it's like a chip. Oh yeah, white bread, everyone agrees is bad. Whole wheat bread is fine. But this is on the internet. Homemade baked potato chips, they're good. We could debate that. So some of the information you get out there is not so good. So I want to end up with, well, what about chocolate? Right? Because come on, we all know chocolate's good for us. We've all seen the studies where the chocolate reduces blood pressure, heart attacks, and strokes. And I've looked at that data very carefully. Those are projected effects of the chocolate based on short-term effects of chocolate over a population. Now, I have gloves. I want to take out chocolate here because I did bring chocolate for people. Do I need to wear the gloves to take out the chocolate? And if people want me to, I will put on the gloves. Okay. So when they do the studies, how much chocolate did they give people? 3 ounces. That's it. That's what they get. The studies are based on that piece of chocolate being given to people, and looking at the blood pressure effects. This is a serving, and I'll talk about why I brought vegan chocolate. This is a serving, according to the package. How many calories? 7. So people are close, right? Because vegan doesn't mean it's necessarily not processed. It means that it contains nothing from the animal world. And the reason I started playing with vegan chocolate was totally accidental. I used French chocolate and I was getting this California chocolate and it wasn't working right. I looked at the back and it was vegan. And then I looked at the company had been bought out by another company and they were a vegan company. And it's very good chocolate. We'll come back. And I hope you would like to taste some. So what about chocolate? So the good news about chocolate is it does good things. There's no question. The flavonoids are very powerful. Chocolate blows blueberries out of the water. So you should have chocolate in the morning instead of blueberries and yogurt. But it turns out if you have blueberries and yogurt, what happens to the flavonoids in the blueberries? They're gone. The positive effect of coffee, if you put milk in, gone. Right? No one ever tells you that, but gone. But what's the bad thing about chocolate? How many of you could be content with just this? A few people, right? Very disciplined people, right? It still contains sugar, right? And so if you have a chocolate bar, you might be very disciplined. Take off a little piece. I admire you, but most people can't. So you still get sugar, you still get fat. And I love this. Due to its palatability, chocolate can be easy to overconsume. Of course. And I don't know if you follow this literature, but the cocoa tree likes to pull up cadmium and lead. And so looking at the various products up here, you can see that the flavanol concentration and the cadmium concentration don't match. But some of the products you would think are really great, like Trader Joe's is highly advertised. It's very inexpensive. You get that huge bar, but it's very low in flavonoids. And some of them are pretty high in lead and cadmium. And I know most of us try to avoid lead and cadmium in our lives. So what about metformin? Very popular, right? It's going to make your telomere just keep going. You're going to live to like 3,000 or 4,000. I didn't put this in, but have any of you seen the recent research? I think he's Australian, but he predicted about 20 years ago that we were reaching the maximum lifespan of a human being. And everyone said, you don't know what you're talking about. And there's convincing data that the maximum lifespan for a man is about 85, and the maximum lifespan for a woman is 87. Not that people don't live beyond that, but that's pretty much what we can do with our current science today. So whether you take metformin or not, if you're generally healthy and you're a man, you're going to live to about 85. But it does affect telomeres, that we know. And that does have an anti-aging effect, and that we know. And it does reduce both oxidative stress and inflammation, which we know are bad. So it may have a beneficial effect. When lots of people put their patients on metformin, how many people use metformin with their patients? I'm not going to ask whether you take metformin or not, okay? How many of them find that the bathroom must be very close, particularly early on, and sometimes unpredictably? It just happens to them, right? They have IBS or something, and they just had this sudden rush of urgency. And I suspect it's the metformin. So this is a great slide. Again, I put it up. It's beautiful. I don't understand a word of it, but it's all the things that metformin is purported to do. And you can see how many different effects. It's not just one. It's multiple effects on cells. You don't have to take a picture, because I uploaded it on purpose. Okay. So how about something to eat? So as Uma said, our original plan was to feed you. Uma, the last time we did this, made a salad that I still make, which is sauteed chickpeas with turmeric and a little oil, and then a frisee salad combined with some lemon juice. And I dipped strawberries in chocolate, and it was wonderful. It just became too problematic for us to do it here in dealing with the hotel. So I promised Madeline that I would work on something that Uma challenged me to work on when we did this the last time in Orlando, which was to make a vegan chocolate something. And I did try it, and it was disgusting, and I threw it out, and I didn't eat it. But I thought as we were coming to the meeting, I should try this again. Now, I'm not an accomplished chef like Uma is. I'm not. I can cook, but I'm not accomplished. I don't understand the intricacies of food science, how things work with each other, what you have to do to various ingredients to come together, which is why I happen to love David Boulay, because he had a knack for it. So what I did is, you can see in this collage, this is French chocolate. This is not vegan chocolate, with a little coffee, 2 pears, peeled, cored, and boiled for 10 minutes, melting the chocolate. The recipe will follow, draining the pears, and just throwing the whole thing in a Cuisinart. I used an immersion blender the first time, and then pouring it into ramekins because I wanted it to look nice. It says in the recipe, takes 4 hours. You can eat it in 20 minutes, right? And so my wife and I have been eating various versions of this, including the vegan version, because I wanted to see, I happen to like the taste of this chocolate. Would it behave? Because vegan chocolate doesn't behave like French chocolate. Okay. When I say behave, when you try to temper it, and so melting it, it melts. Well, what are you doing next? How will it mix with the other ingredients? This does not temper well, I'll tell you that. It just doesn't, meaning it hardens and shines afterwards when you work on it, which makes your lollipops look very good. So here's the recipe. I did upload this. I did bring it on Tuesday night to Madeline, and people ate it. It goes a lot better with whipped cream, if you ask me. And I wouldn't even try vegan whipped cream, but it does go a lot better. It's easy, it's delicious, it's vegan, so you can feel really good about yourself. And I will tell you, a couple of teaspoons is very satisfying. You don't have to eat the whole thing because it's so rich. And with that, thank you. Sorry we couldn't cook for you. I want to thank the panelists for their speaking today. And we have time for questions. That is, the poster session is ongoing, but we do have time for questions if people have questions. And there's chocolate.